Welcome once again to the LarryandFishers.com podcast. My name is Larry Lannon. Glad to have you with us and very happy to have with me Matt Kegley. Matt Kegley is the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning for Hamilton Southeastern Schools. So, Matt, it's been a long time. It's a long time I haven't had you on a podcast yet. It's great to have you.
Oh, it's great to be here, Larry. Thanks for having me.
I was thinking before we started, when I was making notes on this podcast, that you and I had many, many conversations when you were principal at HSE High School about a number of subjects. And I remember I was doing a volunteer project, helping out a teacher, and you were there as well. And you and I were talking about how you had planned on trying to get your PhD, your doctoral degree.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still amazed, and I want you to talk about this. How in the world can you at that time be a principal of a high school, then later become a central office administrator, do all that, and also work on your doctoral degree at the same time?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm not really sure. I have a very loving and forgiving spouse who has certainly allowed me the time to pursue what I think is I see it as a professional accomplishment as well, and helps add certainly to my ability to do my job. I started in trying to be succinct as possible. I started the process of obtaining my doctorate many years ago. And actually, when I transitioned from the principalship at Riverside Junior High to the principalship at HSE High School, I actually had almost everything done but my dissertation. And I decided to take a break so that I could get my feet on the ground relative to the demands of that job. And knowing that, I was going to a building of 3,200 kids and 150 staff members and lots and lots of outside commitments. And 1 year turned into 2, turned into 3, turned into more than that. And it was actually, and I have to give her a lot of credit, when Dr. Combs was hired, she was getting to know all of us, and I mentioned that I had everything done but my dissertation, and she said, "Wait a minute, you have everything done but your dissertation." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "You're finishing that. I refuse to let you." And I think that it's funny, and it makes me laugh, and it's a great memory of her and the influence she had. But I think it speaks broadly to the fact that even as adults, we need other adults to help us sometimes encourage us along to goals that we have. And so I'm thankful for her added encouragement, and it got me jump started back in the program. And actually, I finished. I'm coming up on a year, so during quarantine, I actually finished and wrapped it all up and did my defense via Zoom. So got something to remember the whole COVID experience by as a student.
I'll ask you more about that later on in the podcast, but I want to move to something that's going on now. And I know that all the answers aren't in, but I'm going to ask you a question about it, because virtual learning is now going to be offered next school year for those who choose it. And the final decisions have not been made. I understand that. But I want you to address this, because people I talk to in the community, they always say, well, this should be very simple. All you need to do is find some teachers who want to virtually teach and some families and students that want to virtually learn. That should be very simple, right? Well, I've been going to school board meetings, and I've heard your discussion with the board members, and this is anything but simple. So there's a reason it hasn't been done yet. So just talk about the complexities that you faced in trying to set up this virtual learning program for families who choose that next school year.
Yeah, it is. There is much more to it than on the surface. Part of it is with the plan that we are considering moving forward with pairing completely virtual students with a teacher that would teach completely virtual, which is a little different than what we've been doing this year. The big unknown right now is how many students and families will want to take advantage of that opportunity. And so that has, depending on what that number is, has a big impact on how many teachers you're going to need to pull off of that kind of experience. And logistically, where that can become a real big factor is You may have a group of teachers who desire to teach virtually, and that's great, but your need may exceed the number of people willing to do it. And when that happens, then you have to start looking at, well, how do we get these folks that we need to fill in these gaps of open places? And so that might mean pulling teachers from buildings where maybe their percentage of virtual learners is very low. So there needs to be in-person teachers in that building, and yet this teacher it might be required to go teach virtually. And so then you start touching other buildings because you have to backfill that teacher. And that's where it starts to get very complicated. And then if you fast forward to, say, the end of first semester, and you think about the idea of giving families the opportunity for their child to come back in person, say for second semester, you have to unwind that whole process. And one of the reasons it adds a lot of disruption. And that was one of the reasons why in the midst of the fall, we didn't choose to do a virtual only teacher paired with virtual only kids, because we already had established relationships by that point with our teacher and students. At the secondary level, there's this added layer of varying courses. The options that our kids have, particularly in our high schools, are very vast. And thinking about how you would try to pair virtual only students in, say, a world history class with a teacher who can teach world history and fit that into their schedule so that it's just a virtual class and not any in-person students also. That starts to get weighted with complications, because you have to remember, on one side of the fence, you have a student who's taking potentially 7 different classes throughout the day, paired with a teacher who is teaching at least 6 classes, and trying to make sure that every kid gets where they need to be is a big logistical hurdle. So that's just one of the big pieces that is, I guess, facing us as we start to plan this.
Yeah, I think the two things that I came away from all the discussions. So number one, it's fine if all the staff is volunteering, but if you don't have enough volunteers and you have more families, how do you bring people to that? And the second thing is just what you mentioned last. It could limit what that high school student can take in high school, because you may be more limited in your classes that are available to you. So and I know that you have a school board work session set up soon to get some guidance from the board, so you know how to go, because you had planned on having a plan ready just a few weeks ago, and that's when the complexity came up and you needed to know a little more guidance. So for those people who may be interested in a virtual learning option, you should have the answers to those questions they have, I would think, in the next few weeks, correct?
We're very hopeful, because we know that we're putting that timeline on ourselves, actually, because we know that we need enough time to be able to survey our community to see the level of interest. And I shouldn't say interest. I guess what I should say is commitment, because we're not looking for people to say, I might want to do this. We're looking for people who are saying, my child is going to do this. Because we will not be able to plan for staffing accordingly if we don't have hard numbers. So yes, we're hoping in the next few weeks we have an answer, and then we're rolling the survey out to get commitments from families.
The last thing you want to do is make a change in something where you've already decided, but there are a couple of those items that were at the last school board meeting. One of them had to do with start times. We had a pretty good discussion about start times not that many months ago. And now you had to go before the school board and say, well, we may want to make some changes. Explain what changes you're proposing, and they haven't been enacted yet. They will probably be voted on at the next regular board meeting. But explain what the changes are and why the administration feels are necessary.
Yeah, the changes are for the start and end times to a student day. And we're not proposing any change to the elementary day. But we are proposing changes to the high school tier and to the intermediate junior high tier. As your listeners may know, this year was our first year with a 3-tier bus system. But next year, we will actually flip some positions in those tiers. So right now, our elementary is last on the tiers. Next year, they will be first. High school will be in the middle. Intermediate and junior high will be the last tier of the day, of the morning and afternoon routes. And as we continue to talk about that and plan for next year, at the same time, we were having conversations about shortfalls in funding through our lower enrollment that we had this year. And our transportation director, Zach McKinney, came to us and said, I think that there are some potential efficiencies that I can still gain, which he has seen some of this year by having a 3-tiered system. We've had some drivers that have, because of concerns, a lot of them relative to COVID, who have decided to retire or resign from their driving positions. And when those have happened, because we're in a 3-tier system, Zach has been able to absorb those losses and still be able to deliver on the routes. And we're looking at some potential further efficiencies into next school year that would allow us to also see some continued cost savings. So that's kind of where the whole idea started. And so we just kind of, he has in his mind, and he's figured this out, that the amount of time that he needs between each tier in order to be able to deliver students or get students to school or deliver them home and be able to make it to their next tier. And so what we've gone to the board with, went with last week, was a reduction of 30 minutes to the high school day and a reduction of 15 minutes to the junior high intermediate day.
So, and that's not enacted yet. School board takes it up next time. And as I understand it, it all is tied to the budget and efficiencies with bus transportation.
Yes.
So that was the driver there. The other one, other item you talked about at the last school board meeting dealt with the school calendar. There is a proposed change for the school calendar for the coming school year and the year after that. The coming school year had already been approved. So just explain what changes administrators are proposing for the school year coming up on the calendar.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the board had already approved a couple of years ago the calendar for next school year. Typically, we do those in 2-year phases, and so we'll bring 2 successive years to a board to approve, and then we post those to the website, and it really helps families plan long-term vacations, things of that nature. The reason that we came asking for a revision to next year's already approved calendar is because built into that plan are 2 flex days. Now, when we were creating that calendar and the one we're living this year, we had come off having e-learning days as a mechanism for when we needed an emergency closure. In most cases, that's relative to weather. And we had come off a winter, I guess that would be maybe 3 or 4 winters ago, where we had, I want to say 3 or 4 days in a row of no school. And in conversations with our administratively and with our teachers association, we really kind of thought that that length of time doing e-learning was maybe 3 days in a row was about the limit. And then we felt like, okay, if there's after 3 consecutive days, we really just need to not have school. And then we'll pick up when we're back in person. But we'll put in some flex days into the calendar so that we could use those as makeup days, so we weren't tacking them on to the end. All that now seems very, I don't know, it makes me chuckle a little bit, because we've been living in this through this year, not even e-learning. We've been doing live instruction with students every day. And so now this idea of needing to include makeup days when we know different ways in which we can deliver instruction, those really aren't needed anymore. So that's the biggest piece. That's what really caused us to go back and revisit. We had 2 days in second semester as makeup days that we've asked that those be removed. And that will allow us, and then we put some parameters in place for what we will do if there's an emergency closure and what that format of instruction will be.
And nobody's vacation will be harmed by this change. All the spring break and the winter break, that's all going to be the same. But you did mention something that I think everyone needs to know. And when we're talking about word crafting, words can be very important. You pointed out to the board and everybody else who was watching that there's a difference between e-learning and virtual learning. Explain that briefly.
Yeah, we see e-learning as more of a to popularize terms that we've kind of adopted into our vernacular this year, more of an asynchronous endeavor, more of a passive nature. And that would look like our teachers posting work or assignments on our students' Canvas pages, which is our student management, or not our student management system, but their educational landing place, and that those would go there, and students would access those, and then they could potentially reach out to teachers via email, but there wouldn't be an expectation of live instruction necessarily, which is really what we see virtual learning or virtual instruction as, which is and that's why we've said that would be for our secondary students. They would follow what would be their daily schedule for that day, and at the appointed times they would zoom in, if Zoom's the platform we're using, zoom into the classroom, the virtual classroom, and the teacher would deliver instruction as if they were all in front of that teacher in person, but it would just all be done virtually.
I have a question related to all that, because the pandemic has made life very tough on a lot of people. The families had a tough time, the students had a tough time, and absolutely, I know a lot of teachers, and the teachers had a very difficult time doing their jobs this school year. From an administrator's point of view, how have you tried to deal with all that stress on the system?
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't start any comments. As you point out, certainly all people have had challenges during the pandemic, and the thought of coming back to school as we did, our teachers took on responsibilities and learned new ways of instruction that they had no professional development for prior to this year. And they jumped in and they did what they needed to do, and they've delivered, and they've shown up every day for our kids. And I in no way want to minimize the efforts that they put out there. I have not been doing it; they have, and I have had the opportunity to watch that in action and understand and try to understand the difficulties of trying to teach students in front of you while at the same time trying to teach students on a device, and being able to deliver the level of instruction that our teachers are accustomed to delivering to our students and families. And that's been a huge challenge. And so, that in and of itself has been a wear on the system, in the sense that we've tried to provide some professional development when we could. We've had to probably have a lot more meetings to address concerns and issues that have cropped up along the way, and we still have not gotten to a place where I would consider it to be perfect, and certainly wouldn't be anything that I think we would, if given the chance to plan even better, which is what we're trying to do for next year for virtual, we would probably do it a different way. And so that's what we're looking at.
Also at the last school, you were busy at the last school board
I
meeting
was.
because you had something else you had to deal with, and that was the final approval of something that's been in the works for quite a while, a memorandum of understanding with the city of Fishers and Hub and Spoke. Uh, the new term has kind of been used in relationship to that MOU, experiential learning. I've heard it enough. I think I know what it means. Maybe not everybody listening or watching knows what it means. So I'm kind of incorporate a definition of that into this response. How does this agreement that was just approved open up new learning experiences for the students at HSE schools?
Well, I think it further solidifies, in my opinion, the great relationship that we have with the city, and we already have some experiences such as our Nature First program out at Ritchie Woods, that we can, and then this would be another one that, and it goes along, although it's not with the city, but our fourth grade experience with Connor Prairie would be an akin, very similar situation to that. It just solidifies this idea that we're going to try to, when possible, take learning beyond the classroom walls. And that's really, in my eyes, what experiential learning is. We can learn concepts and we can learn ideas, and in the classroom, those are great. But when we have an opportunity to go out into the community and see what we've been learning come to life, that gives us a chance to, it gives the students a chance to really, bring that learning to life. And so it's this is an opportunity for our fifth grade to take a STEM unit and go into the makerspace area at Hub and Spoke. And I'm imagining we have Dr. Lone, who's our elementary director of education, is working with a team of teachers to develop what that units would ultimately look like, but giving all of our fifth graders an opportunity to have that experience. And then in that MOU, we also, I guess, kind of put placeholders in for other experiences. We don't know what yet those might be with the city, but again, I think it solidifies not only what we've been doing, but gives us an opportunity to continue to look to create with the city other opportunities for the students of Hamilton Southeastern Schools.
Now, we're recording this on April 21st, the day before there was a school board work session, and your name was invoked. Not in a bad way, but Nataki Pettigrew, who's involved in equity and inclusion, mentioned the fact that she had been working with you on some of the people who are involved at the school buildings with that program. So talk about your involvement with making sure that you have coaches and others in the school buildings who are dealing with this issue of equity and inclusion.
Well, I've been, on a personal / professional level with HSE Schools, I've been a part of our district equity teams since I came to the district, and then as building principal in 2 separate buildings, have worked with our equity coaches in those respective buildings, and have always been, I've tried to always be very supportive of the work that our equity coaches are doing. And Nataki's presence here with the district we have already felt the benefits of her being on our team, and are appreciative to have her. And I've just been, trying my best to help her out as much as possible in terms of acclimating to the district in her role, and trying to give, where appropriate, history in what we've been doing with equity coaches, and helping to coordinate if needed. I certainly don't want to, I appreciate, I guess, her bringing my name up, but she's been certainly at the forefront of the work since she's been here, and has been doing a great job.
We are, again, recording this the day before a new superintendent of schools is to be announced. Nobody's leaked it to me, just so you know. It's been kept very close to the vest by those who know. So obviously, we can't talk about that today. But in general, I'm asking the question a little more broadly. Your expectations from the transition. Dr. Alan Borff, who's been superintendent for several years, will be retiring at the end of June. So there'll be a transition period for the next several weeks. So how would you envision that transition going?
Well, I feel like our role, my role, is to support and try to acclimate our new superintendent, to uh, and do whatever I can to help that, I guess, transition process go as smooth as possible. There will be certainly some, I'm sure, a list of questions and wanting to learn, opportunity for understanding about what we're doing here in the district, and initiatives that we have going. Hot topic items that are, that we're attending to. From my viewpoint, I feel like it will be important to help our new superintendent understand from a teaching and learning perspective, where things are currently in terms of curriculum, and where we would like to see things go. Many of the things we've talked about just in this podcast are things that we would want to talk about, initiatives that we have going, ideas for future initiatives, and it's a learning opportunity for us too, to understand how this person would like to lead our building and our district, and try to do everything we can to make that person as successful as possible.
I said I would wait for the end to ask this question, but I've always had a lot of respect for people who get that PhD degree. It is a rough process. You mentioned the word dissertation. What that really means for people who don't know is you're essentially writing a book, or the equivalent of writing a book. Sometimes they're even published at times. And you have to defend it before a group of other PhDs. And I don't know if it was easier or harder to do it on Zoom, but that was the way normally it's done in person. So I always try to ask people when it's been in recent years, what was the subject of your thesis?
So I have a real passion for building principles. It was absolutely in all of my areas of in my educational career. It was a position that I always valued. I loved being a building principal, and I loved the relationships that I was able to. I think what I liked so much about being a building principal was I loved the interaction with doing everything I could to support the adults in the building and make them better at their job, while also having that contact with students. And so principals in Indiana were the focus of my dissertation. And specifically, I was looking at some purposeful practices that Robert Marzano, who has been a longtime educational researcher, nationally, is a national speaker and has written many, many books. He highlighted some responsibilities in the early 2000s that he felt were the most important for a principal to undertake, that they had the most influence on. And so I looked at the principals in Indiana who took my survey. I sent out a survey that compared their ability to carry out these responsibilities, and then I cross-referenced that with the achievement level relative to these schools being 4-star schools, which is a designation that at one time the state used as a designation for high-performing schools across the state. And so it was a really fulfilling opportunity. I mean, one of the things that I was always given as a piece of advice was do something, whatever your topic is for your dissertation, make sure it's something that you have passion and interest in and that you really enjoy, or else it makes it 10 times harder to finish. Because and that's so true, because I can't imagine if I was writing something that I didn't care a whole lot about, how much longer it would have taken me.
Well, that's interesting, and you're right. People do need to have a passion for what they write, because otherwise, it's a pretty serious slog. It's hard enough as it is. We're out of time now. I just want to give you one opportunity. We've talked about a lot here. Anything you would like to add before we wrap this up?
I'm just really looking forward and excited, not because Dr. Borst's retiring, but change brings about opportunities to continue to learn. And so I'm excited for our community and for our school system as we have this leadership change, at the top of our organization, that it's an opportunity for all of us to learn from whoever this person is, and from this person to learn from our district. And hopefully we are all moving in the same direction, which is continue to provide excellence in education for our students.
We spent this time with Matt Kegley. He's the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning for the Hamilton Southeastern Schools. And as he mentioned earlier, he's had principalships at Riverside and several years at HSE High School. So his connection with HSE Schools goes back a number of years. So Matt Kegley, thanks for your time. A great pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Larry. Thanks for having me.